The world is a stranger place than you know. Hidden away in libraries, crypts, alien cities, and long-forgotten ruins are dangers you can never fully prepare for. Beasts and men who would rip you to pieces should you happen to cross their path. Secrets whose knowledge would drive you mad sure as I'm sitting here. And somewhere, just beyond our reach, an ancient god stirs in his sleep, and should it wake, ruin will surely follow. This is Eldritch horror, and you need to be prepared. Hello, my name is Shay, and this is RTFM, the show where I teach you how to play a game, because that shit's hard. Today, we're looking at Eldritch horror, where you will be working together playing as a team of investigators trying to prevent the end of the world. In order to stop the Ancient One from awakening, you'll need to solve mysteries, find clues, fight monsters, and encounter strange and horrible events. This game requires strategy, cooperation, and more than a little luck. You will encounter more dread and panic than in most games out there, and you won't always make it through. But you are going to have a great time doing it, and you will win or lose together. So let's see how you're going to do that. So this is what the board will look like when it's all set up, but don't worry about that just yet. First thing is to pick your antagonist. In the base game, there are 4 ancient ones to choose from. Cthulhu, betentacled sea god, you probably know him. Azathoth, who devours worlds, basically the Galactus of H.P. Lovecraft. Yog-Sothoth, an incomprehensible mass of eyes and tentacles. And Shub-Niggurath, the racist one. Each ancient one comes with a deck of mysteries and research encounters, so make sure to separate those and set them aside. Then place the Doom tracker on the listed number and the Omen tracker on the green comet. Lastly, perform any special setup instructions listed on your Ancient One card. For example, Cthulhu requires you to set aside a Deep One monster, 1 Starspawn monster, and Cthulhu's special encounter cards. Next, you need to pick your investigator. You can choose them if you want to. I like to randomly take 2 investigators and then just pick which one I like better, but do it however you like. You'll notice that each investigator has different skills, and these will be very important, but for your first game, maybe just pick the character that looks coolest to you. When you get your investigator, you'll start off with a few trinkets, so search through the asset and or spell decks to find your starting possessions. Then put those aside. You'll also need your health and sanity, so grab tokens for those. And lastly, place your character stand on your starting location. You'll also need to pick 1 player to be the lead investigator. The last thing is to build the Mythos deck. Now, these are events that will come up at the end of every turn, and they will usually ruin your day. And if you look at the Ancient One card, you'll see a table of 3 sets of 3 numbers in green, yellow, and blue. Now, you use this chart to create 3 Mythos decks for stages 1, 2, and 3 of the game. Shuffle each of them individually and place them in numerical order with the stage 1 deck on top. After that, you just need to separate the rest of the cards and tokens and put them in convenient piles near the board. Take all of the normal monsters and put them in a box or a bowl, which will be referred to as the Monster Cup. Then put the epic monsters in a separate pile nearby. And the epic monsters are orange and have this little corner cut out on the side. Lastly, you'll need to resolve starting effects. First, grab the appropriate reference card for the number of players. Let's say we're playing with 4, because why not? Now, this card will tell you how many gates and clues to start with. And the locations where the gates and clues are spawned is printed on the bottom of the token. Then, because every time you spawn a gate, a monster comes with it, randomly grab a monster from the cup for each gate. The last symbol refers to the monster search value, which we'll talk about later. You also need to draw some asset cards for the reserve. You place this token on the location shown on the back of the top card of the expedition deck, and draw the first mystery card and place it near the Ancient One. Once all that's done, you're ready to start the game. Whew, setup explanations always kind of suck. You still with me? I need you to actually answer before Okay, good. Let's talk about actions. Each turn of the game is split into 3 phases: the action phase, encounter phase, and the mythos phase. Each player will perform 1 phase, starting with a lead investigator and going clockwise before collectively moving to the next phase. During the action phase, each player may perform up to 2 actions, but cannot perform the same action twice. The 6 actions you can perform are travel, prepare for travel, rest, trade, acquire assets, and component actions. Most of these are really simple. First is travel, which allows you to move your investigator to any adjacent space. Then, if you have any travel tickets, you can spend them to move additional spaces. Train tickets will let you move across train paths. Ship tickets move you across ocean paths. You spend 1 ticket per space and can spend multiple tickets if you have them. And the way you get tickets is through the prepare for travel action. If you're in a city space, you may spend an action to gain 1 travel ticket of your choice, but there must be a train or ocean path adjacent to that city to get their respective tickets. If you ever have more than 2 travel tickets, you must choose 2 to keep and discard the others. Next, you can use an action to rest, which allows you to regain 1 health and 1 sanity, but only up to your maximum amount of each. Some card effects will also trigger whenever you take a rest action. You can't rest if there's a monster in your space, but honestly, that's like horror movie 101, so duh. Now, if you and another investigator are on the same space, you may trade any possessions between the two of you. This includes assets, artifacts, clues, spells, and travel tickets. You don't have to give the same amount of possessions as you take, but the other player does have to consent to the trade. No means no. Another way to get items is through the acquire assets action. If you're on a city space that doesn't contain monsters, you may attempt to acquire any asset in the reserve by performing an influence test. You do this by rolling a number of dice equal to your influence skill plus or minus any modifiers. You may gain assets with a total value equal to or less than the number of successes that you rolled. Let's break this down just a bit. Lily has a base influence of 2, but let's say we've managed to improve that, which means she rolls 4 dice for this test. Improvements are really cool. They improve your base skills by 1 or 2. You can't go any higher than 2, but they're really good. Anyway, when performing tests, you count 5s and 6s as a success, which means she has 2 successes. Looking at the reserve, we see that she can acquire this axe, or both the cat burglar and the pocket watch, but she doesn't have enough for this double-barreled shotgun. She could, however, take a bank loan, which will automatically give her 2 more successes, which would be just enough. Unfortunately, if you take a loan, you also have to take a debt condition. I'll talk more about conditions later, just know that most of them aren't good, and you can't have the same one twice. If you don't take any assets for whatever reason, you may discard 1 card from the reserve. After the acquire assets action is complete, replace any empty spaces with new cards. Skill tests like the one we just did are a really big part of this game, but I'll talk more about them a little later. For now, the last type of action is component actions. These are actions listed on cards or investigator sheets, basically anything that says action on it in bold. You can't perform the action of a single component twice in one turn, but you can perform component actions of 2 different components. Some components will say local action, which means that if you have one of those, you or any investigator on your space can use that ability. Yay! That takes care of the action phase, so let's move on to encounters. Each player will have at least 1 encounter every turn, and there are 3 different types: location, token, and combat. Most encounters will require you to perform 1 or more skill tests, and these will follow the same rules as the influence test I mentioned for acquiring assets. The encounter will show a symbol, which refers to one of your skills, and might have a positive or negative number. That number is a modifier, which tells you if you can add or subtract any dice to your roll. Basic skill tests only require 1 success for you to pass, but some are complex encounters. A complex encounter has an initial test, followed by a pass effect and a fail effect. These often require another test, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just good for you. Or, more likely, they can be really, really bad. Back to encounters. Now, the first type I mentioned is the location encounter. When performing a location encounter, you draw a card that matches the space your investigator is on. Now, if this is a generic city, sea, or wilderness space, you draw a general card and read the encounter that matches the type of space you're on. If you land on a big city, you may draw a card from that region, which will have city-specific encounters. Or, if you want, you can draw a general card instead. Token encounters work the same way. Pretty much any time there's a token on the board that you have to deal with, that's a token encounter. Now, if you're on a space with a gate, you can choose to draw from the Other World Encounters deck, which will hopefully let you close that gate. Clue encounters let you draw from the Research Encounters deck, and the Active Expedition token allows you to perform an Expedition encounter. For each of these, you can choose to perform location encounters instead. If you want to. If you perform an expedition, whether you succeed or fail, move the token to the location shown on the back of the top card in the deck. There are also 2 types of token encounters that don't involve random cards. These are the rumor tokens and defeated investigators. Let's start with rumors. These are ongoing events that come from those blue mythos cards, and they just suck. They're never good for you, and in order to get rid of them, you usually need to go to a specific location and encounter the rumor. The mythos cards that detail the effects will tell you what you need to do, other than be sad, which will probably already happened. On the other hand, a defeated investigator encounter is a way to make the best out of a bad situation. Now, let's say your investigator loses all of their health or sanity. If that happens, they become crippled or insane, respectively, and are defeated. And when this happens, advance the Doom Tracker by 1, move the investigator to the nearest city, place it on its side, and put a health or sanity token on it to show which it lost. The player discards all conditions, health, sanity, and improvement tokens, and places all possessions on their character sheet, which they put aside. Then, if that player was the lead investigator, pass the token to another player. At the end of the turn, you will choose a new investigator and continue playing with their starting possessions and location. That defeated investigator is still there though, and you probably want to pick up her stuff. In order to do that, you need to go to that location and encounter it. You do this by flipping over the character sheet and performing either the crippled or insane encounter. And if you do this, you'll get all of their possessions, and if you're lucky, you might even retrieve the Doom Tracker. The Doom Tracker is really important. I'll talk about it later. Lastly, there are combat encounters. First, let's take a look at the monsters you'll be facing. Maybe just a couple of them. Yeah, that's better. First, we should check out an average monster and talk about how combat works. On the back of each monster token are conditions for 2 tests, a will and a strength test, which may include positive or negative modifiers. The will test happens first, and the number of successes needed is equal to how horrifying the monster is. If you meet or exceed that, then nothing happens, and you move on to the strength test. If you don't, you'll lose sanity equal to the difference. In this case, because you only rolled 1 success, you would lose 1 sanity. Whether you succeed the will test or not, as long as you weren't defeated, you move on to the strength test. For this part of the fight, each success reduces the monster's toughness by 1. If you deal damage to a monster without killing it, place a health marker on it to keep track. This other number is the monster's damage. Like its horror, if you roll fewer successes than the monster's damage value, you'll lose health equal to the difference. Items and spells help a lot with this part of combat, so it's not a bad idea to stock up. But, and this is true for all tests, if you have multiple cards that give you skill bonuses, you can only use the bonus from one of them. You can, however, use the abilities from all the other cards. In this case, you would only use the skill bonus from the gun, but you can also re-roll a die because of the net. On top of that, any ability that specifically says to roll extra dice is also used. These aren't considered bonuses and so are counted separately. This can be a little confusing for some. I had trouble with it myself at first, so let me go over it again real quick. To determine how many dice you roll in any test, take your base skill number, plus improvements if you have them. Then you add skill bonus from any one asset, artifact, or spell, and remember, a skill bonus is written as the symbol for that skill and a +1 or 2 or whatever number. You add or subtract the test modifier, and then if anything tells you to roll additional dice, you add all of those, and you will always roll at least 1 die. There are also 2 common symbols you'll see on monster tokens. This green tentacle egg thing is a spawn icon, which tells you that when this monster enters the game, it has an immediate effect, usually moving it to a specific location. This other symbol, the red lightning bolt, maybe, is called the Reckoning, and you'll actually see it on a lot of cards and tokens. I'll talk more about it in a bit, just know that it's a triggered ability, so whenever the trigger occurs, follow the instructions on the back. Now, cultists have both of these symbols, but if you look at the back of them, it's all just asterisks. That's because each ancient one has a different army of cultists at its beck and call, which means they all have different abilities. The information on the ancient one sheet will tell you their stats. All other monsters have something extra written on the back as well. For example, if you defeat this skeleton in combat, you'll regain that sanity you lost. There's one more type of monster to talk about, and that's the epic monster. Now, like I said earlier, you'll notice that these look a little different. They're orange, they've got the cut corner, and they don't go in the monster cup like all of the other monsters. They'll come up as a result of a mystery card or room or some other horrible effect, and they have a couple slightly different rules once they're on the board. First, the only way to get rid of an epic monster is to reduce its health to 0. Now that sounds like a no-brainer, but there are a lot of other ways to discard regular monsters. Unfortunately, with epic monsters, you can't do those. The other big thing is that they can't be moved, so wherever they get spawned is where they'll be ruining your day until you fight them. Also, probably after you fight them too. Whenever you end your turn on a space with a monster, you have to have a combat encounter with it. If there are multiple monsters, you choose the order in which to encounter them, but you have to fight them all. If you defeat all the monsters you fight, then you can have another encounter with the location or any token on your space. But if you don't, that's the end of your turn. So those are the type of encounters you will encounter, but there are 2 more things to mention before we move on to the mythos phase. First is becoming delayed. Now this will happen every once in a while, and when it does, you put your character on its side. On your next action phase, you must spend both actions to stand up. Then continue with your turn as normal. The other thing is conditions. Throughout the game, you will acquire some nasty conditions like debt, paranoia, cursed, and others. Each condition card will tell you how it'll affect you and how, if possible, to get rid of it. They'll also have a unique triggered effect on the back, so even if you get the same condition again, it might affect you in a completely new way. Okay, now that's taken care of, let's get to the mythos phase. Okay, so remember the mythos deck that we built during setup? At the end of every turn, you'll draw the top card and resolve its effects. First, you'll look at the symbols at the top of the card and perform them in order from left to right. So let's figure out what they all mean, yeah? The first symbol advances the omen tracker clockwise. Then, if there are any open portals with matching constellations, advance the doom by 1 for each. Next is the reckoning, which I mentioned briefly before. When the reckoning shows up, any card or token with one of these symbols will activate, and they'll do so in this order: monsters, ancient one, ongoing mythos cards, and then conditions and possessions. The only exception to this is that any item, condition, or monster that is created during the reckoning does not get activated until the next turn. True story, the first time I played this game we didn't know that rule, and all of our bad conditions kept multiplying and we died in like 3 turns. So remember that. This symbol tells you to spawn gates. How many you spawn is determined by how many players you have, so check your reference card and draw gates from the top of the gate deck, placing them on their printed location. Then spawn a random monster on each gate. This guy is called the Monster Surge and will have you spawning monsters at each gate matching the current Omen constellation. How many monsters you spawn is also listed on the reference card. In our case, we would spawn 2 monsters each on 3 gates. However, if there were no gates matching the current Omen, we would spawn a new gate along with 1 monster. This magnifying glass tells you to spawn clues. Again, check the reference card to see how many. You spawn them by grabbing a random clue and placing it on the location listed on its back. I briefly mentioned clues during the encounters phase, but there are a couple of reasons you'll want to have them. First, at several points during the game, different cards or components will require you to have clues in order to fuel their effects. Second, you can spend a clue during any test to reroll 1 die, which is great. Sometimes. And then other times it just makes you really angry because you end up spending all of your clues and just keep rolling ones. Moving on. When you see this symbol, you'll place a rumor token on the space indicated. These will provide you with a location to encounter the rumor and hopefully get rid of it. Rumor cards sometimes tell you to place Eldritch tokens as well. The Mythos cards will tell you what those tokens will represent, but they usually serve as a ticking clock for something unpleasant. Depending on the color of the card, these symbols will change. Blue cards always have rumors, green cards spawn monsters and clues, yellow spawn gates and has the reckoning, and both green and yellow move the omen tracker. Now, only after resolving these effects do you read the card and learn just how it's going to punch you in the face this round. One last thing about these cards, you'll notice that some cards have ice or tentacles on the sides. These indicate that those cards are easier or harder to deal with. If you want to change the difficulty of the game before building the Mythos deck, remove the tentacles cards to make it easier, or the ice cards to make it harder. Okay, so once the Mythos phase is complete, if you've solved a mystery during that turn, draw the next one from the deck. Now, if you've solved 3 mysteries and survived to the end of the turn, you've won the game. Which leads us to... So, like I said, if you can solve 3 mysteries before the Ancient One awakens, then they are defeated and you win the game. Thing is, that's not always going to happen. If the Doom Tracker reaches 0, then the Ancient One awakens and you'll have to deal with the consequences. Most Ancient Ones have a final mystery, which you'll have to solve if they awaken, and that's not easy. I mean, these are gods after all, so if they wake up, you're in trouble. And that's not the only way things can turn south. You'll lose the game early if all investigators are defeated in 1 round, or if you reach a Mythos phase when there are no cards left in the deck. But that's not going to happen because you're totally going to win. You can solve the mysteries, and then Cthulhu's going to keep napping, and you can get Froyo after. Yeah, good luck. One last thing before I wrap up. I've taught you the basic game rules, but there's a whole book of rule clarifications that Fantasy Flight has included with the regular manual. Now, I'm actually going to go over this a little bit more in a later video, but I'm bringing it up now to say, don't worry about it. That's not to say it's not useful. If you need to look something up, it's perfect for that, but you don't need to memorize everything in there, which is why I didn't go over most of its contents. And that's it for Eldritch Horror. I hope I've been able to help you and that you're excited to play. It's a great game and provides a truly unique experience. And if I can get more people to play it, then I'll consider that a success. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like the video, do all the social media stuff. The buttons are somewhere around me and the links are wherever those go. You should also check out my other YouTube channel, 1020 Films. We do sketches and shorts. We have a lot of funny stuff and there are new videos every week. I'll be posting a few more videos about Eldritch Horror, so keep an eye out for those, and watch my other videos about Twilight Imperium. Speaking of which, these last 2 games have been pretty quintessentially American, so next game I think we're going to go a little Euro. There's this game I like called The Castles of Mad King Ludwig, and I think everyone should be playing it. See you next time.